Hey there, this is post recording Damon. Just wanted to take a second to say that Jared and I spent a while talking about the salary cap, how NFL players are compensated based on their positional value, franchise tags, compensatory draft picks, and things like that not everybody knows about the league because it's kind of special to the NFL in the way that it operates. If you're already familiar with these things and you want to skip past that part and just get to us talking about the news, that's going to be about 27 minutes in. Either way, hope you enjoy the episode. Thanks for listening.
Welcome to episode 2 of 22 Man Game with Jared and Damon. I'm Jared. That's Damon. It is July 25th at 6 p.m., which is relevant because news broke like 5 or 10 minutes ago. Damon, how have you been this week?
Been all right this week. Been a busy week. We had two separate TTRPG campaigns this week, Tuesday and Thursday, that we're both a part of. One of them that you run, and then I recorded with them on Wednesday, and now here I am on Friday recording with you. So D&D and podcasts, those are my things, I guess. But I'm good. I'm good. I'm excited to talk about all this stuff today. A lot to cover. How about yourself?
I'm doing well. I really enjoyed the episode of Two Man Game this week. Found it very informative. And yes, we got to spend most of our Thursday evening either incapacitated or dead in a fictional setting. So that was very engaging. And just, yeah, generally a good week of a lot of tabletop, both, yes, leading it and then playing it. A lot of sports anime this week as well, which personal favorite of mine. My dad recommended Rising Impact, which is a golf anime on Netflix, and
Mm.
it's fun. And Blue Lock, a soccer anime, was very interesting. So now that I've alienated about 80% of the listener base, I think I think that we should go ahead and jump right into the skeleton of what we're doing today because we do have a lot we hope to cover. We'll see how far we make it. Step one for us today is going over some core concepts surrounding free agency, the draft, and the financials of teams in the league, specifically the salary cap, tools like the franchise tag, because we got some feedback from Dom on our previous episode. As someone who is not as avid a football enjoyer, Dom had a lot of questions about how salaries work and what makes a salary expensive, not expensive. How do you gauge that? And so we wanted to provide some information for listeners newer to the game on how some of that financial stuff works. And we're going to start by going over the franchise tag, which is an interesting tool. There are technically 3 different types, but one of them is far and away the most prevalent. The 3 types are the non-exclusive tag, the exclusive tag, and the transition tag. Most of the time when you see franchise tag, you mean non-exclusive tag. The way this works is the team essentially gives a built-in 1-year contract to a pending free agent that has a value set to the average of the top 5 salaries at a player's given position over the last 5 years. So it's a high value contract, which incentivizes teams to negotiate with those players on a long-term contract. On a non-exclusive tag, other teams are able to negotiate with that player, and if they sign that player away, it will cost them 2 first-round picks going back to the original team, which very rarely happens. On occasion, the exclusive tag, which is more expensive but prevents other teams from negotiating, may be used, and that's in the case where a player might actually be worth trading 2 first-round picks for if you can sign them and steal them away from the other team. So, Damon, would you be willing to go through the positional tag values for the non-exclusive tags to give our listeners context on what the top contracts look like at each position.
Sure. What if I just said no? Nah, actually, I don't feel like it.
Well, then
Yeah,
I would power ahead because that's what our diligent listeners and subscribers have asked for. But please provide us with your brilliance.
sure. And I'll round because I feel like getting into the exact specifics is a little much. But quarterbacks, we're looking at about 41 million. So the most expensive position, of course, most important position, most people would say. Running backs, about 12 million is that non-exclusive number. Wide receivers are sitting about 25 and a half, in that range, million. Offensive linemen, 25 million is very expensive. I did not realize offensive linemen would be that expensive. Tight ends, 14 million. So even less expensive than offensive linemen, your tight ends. Defensive ends, about 25 million. So about the same as the other side. Defensive tackles, so at that interior, a little less valuable, 23 million. So I guess edge rushing is a little more important than stopping the run up the middle, supposedly. Linebackers, 27 million. Corners, 20 million, just about. Safeties, a little under 20 million, but it rounds up to about that number. And then for your kickers and punters, we're looking at about 6.5 million. Interesting numbers, I think, for your value. So those kind of your average values for each position. It's interesting because I feel like, as a basketball fan, positions are kind of becoming less meaningful. And I feel like that is kind of the case with some players in football. Not always, but I feel like you do have times where a defensive a defensive edge, DE, doesn't really always exist necessarily. It's like an edge rusher that could be a defensive end, but could also be a linebacker, like a Von Miller type, for example. He kind of fits in the both of those position groups. And I think that's kind of interesting. It's also interesting that all the offensive linemen are grouped up into one because I feel like teams typically value certain offensive linemen more based on what kind of team they operate. But yeah, tight ends being the lowest non-special teams position, or tight ends and running backs being the lowest non-special teams position, kind of interesting. I don't know why that is. Running backs being so low is kind of crazy. I guess it's a lifespan thing.
That is a big part of it. So there are a couple things to I'll kind of tack on here. The first being that running back positional value has been steadily decreasing for a long time, which was why Derrick Henry and Saquon Barkley's contracts were such a big deal. Because as you said, the lifespan of running backs is really low. And I think in general, the difference in play between running back 10 and running back 30 wasn't perceived as so large that it warranted a huge contract. And so when you have a lot of running backs coming out into the draft, you can ultimately save money and reset the sort of timeline for rookies. And that's because rookies in the NFL, being on a set wage scale, aren't going to make as much as veterans in most circumstances. And so in the case of a position like running back, that ends up driving down the value of veteran contracts because they are so replaceable. Whereas positions that have greater scarcity, such as defensive end, where you don't have as many very good defensive ends, then those higher end veteran contracts do tend to creep up. And yeah, I think the offensive lineman, it's been considered for a long time that tackle is the premium position there. Guards and centers simply don't make as much. Left tackles specifically you might hear
Hmm.
them referenced as the blindside protector because when a quarterback is holding a ball and standing sideways, they can't see to their left, right? So it's that much more important that their backs are literally covered. And I think that's what's driving up the offensive lineman number. I believe Trey Smith for the Chiefs signed the most expensive guard contract in history. And I want to say it was 27 million this offseason. He was one of the two players non-exclusive tagged this year. And yeah, tight ends also just kind of a tweener position. And yeah, have not seen a ton of value, but I think that's going up. And I wonder if it will continue to climb as premier tight ends continue to make themselves known. I'm sure guys like Brock Bowers for the Raiders, maybe Sam Laporta for the Lions will get a big deal. I believe Trey McBride for the Cardinals actually did sign the highest contract for tight end ever this offseason, if I'm not mistaken. So these numbers always climb. And so it's not a huge surprise when maybe the third best cornerback in the league is signing for well over $20 million. But this gives a good baseline for what is considered to be a significant investment at the position. If a player is making as much or more than this number, that says that they're prized by the team and considered a pretty valuable asset, which is why when we talked about T. Higgins getting a lot of money, T. Higgins, the other player who was non-exclusive tagged, ends up making $5 million or so more than the tag. So, yeah. Any other observations on the positional value or on the tag in general there?
The only other thing I would say is that I think it's a little strange that corners and safeties, so the secondary in general, make way less than the rest of the defense, by over $5 million plus compared to the D line. I mean, compared to the linebackers and then the D line as well.
I'm actually really surprised by the linebacker number being the second highest on here. And I have to think that's counting edge players that sort of the distinction between an edge and defensive end being, defensive end plays on the line, whereas an edge might be playing a little bit off the line, that kind of thing. But pass rushing is just considered so premium, I think, that anyone who can rush the passer will make a big contract. Like Micah Parsons has not yet signed his new deal, but he's considered a linebacker, right? I think TJ Watt is considered a linebacker, and we'll talk about him in a minute. So I think players who rush the passer get the biggest contracts. And so that drives down the value of corners and safeties, though, as the league evolves, the conversations around positional value will evolve as well. So it is definitely interesting. And like you said about hybrid players too, safeties and corners often play each other's positions and sort of rotate depending on the needs of the defense. So it's interesting to see that they are relatively bunched up.
Who comes up with these numbers?
That's a great question. I guess the agents look at whatever the last guy got and then said, I'll take 1 million more than that. And then it just keeps happening. Yeah, they're kind of random. Okay. That's franchise tags explained. And that gives us kind of a view into the positional value of contracts. And with that, I also want to mention the current salary cap in the league. There's a certain amount of money that you are allowed to spend. Can't spend a dime more than that amount of money. And how that works is typically the value of a player's contract is divided over the course of that contract, depending on the type of money they're being given. And if the amount of money you're giving in a certain year goes over that cap number, you have to cut players, trade, whatever it is to get below that number. When you hear dead cap referenced, that's the amount of money that is being paid to players who are no longer on the team. And that occurs when a player is released or if their contract essentially voids and money that was being spread out over a number of years gets sped up to the year of their release or the year their contract ends. So that is putting those numbers in context. So a top linebacker might be a tenth of your entire team's contract, right? In theory, less than that, but it's a good template. Let's jump into how the Rooney Rule works real quick. This is a core tenet of the NFL's DEI initiatives. Did you read when they started this program, Damon, when you were going through the resources on the Rooney Rule? I know you brought up the 20-year timeline.
Yeah, 2003 is when they started the Rooney Rule. Basically, since then, when teams interview for coaching vacancies, they have to, or head coaching vacancies specifically, I think, right? They have to interview at least one diverse candidate, is the word that they use. Typically, that meant minorities. In 2022, so just 3 years ago, they added that women were a part of that minority group as well. And then do you want to talk about what happens if teams do get those people or get those people get taken away from them?
Yeah, I want to add some details here as well. So in-person interviews for diverse candidates for the GM and head coaching spots, you do have to interview 2 minorities and or women for the coordinator positions, and then at least 1 diverse candidate for the QB coach position, because that's considered sort of a stepping stone to offensive coordinators who are often hired. And if you have a minority candidate hired away for a major position, that's going to be head coach, major executive, like a general manager who manages the roster, then your team receives 2 compensatory selections in the draft. These are basically additional selections beyond the normal sequence of the 32 teams picking in record order. And those are conferred as third round picks at the end of the round that you receive the year that they leave and then a year after. So you get a third round pick the year that coach is hired away, and then the year following. And it creates an interesting incentive to hire minority coordinators and executives and makes that part of the game. And I think it's arguable whether that has the impact that's intended or sends the message that's intended. But that's the outcome of that. I'm sure you have thoughts on that as well.
Well, being a partially a minority, I suppose, it's a little strange. It's weird that the league, I mean, like, I get that the league wanted to have more diversity in it, and this was their idea of having that. It's weird to require, I think, minority coaching and GM and etc. interviews because I feel like you should just hire the most qualified candidate, regardless of what that person's, background is. And you can kind of just say, I think I'm going to hire, this guy or this guy, but I guess I'll throw that guy and that guy in there to follow the Rooney Rule just to make sure I, cross my T's and dot my I's. I'll make sure to include those people too. And then getting picks for someone being hired away is also interesting. Uh, Honestly, like when you were saying it just now, it felt a little to me like like slave trade. Like that.
I was like,
That's
is this going to be a Dennis Schroeder moment? Yeah.
yeah. Like, oh, we got your guys. Here's your here's your payment for it. That's what it comes across as. I get the idea. I think this the way they're executing it and have been for a long time is a little strange because I feel like and there's also like there's no way to know if teams are interviewing people just to make the rule or just because they actually want to hire that person.
Yeah, I think there's a number of cases that are pretty obvious examples of interviewing to satisfy this rule. I believe the Jaguars this year, their head coach hiring process was really interesting because they had a general manager that their current head coach didn't want to work with, and most people in the league didn't want to work with. So they basically fired the general manager to woo the candidate they wanted, but then they had to, I believe, like express interview minority candidates so that it was okay for them to then hire the person they wanted to hire before the team he was already working for found out, and there were reasons for that. But all of that to say, I agree with you, and I think probably the idea, the optimistic view, I don't disagree that it's weird to provide like compensation for losing coaches of a certain background. When you say slave trade, I actually see that a lot more than I did before you said it. But I think the idea is you developed a minority coach who then was able to he was granted additional opportunities. And so as a result, this is like a reward, but it's just so strange. It's
Hmm.
harder and harder to defend the more you think about it. Not that I was already sitting here like, yeah, this is a great system. I think I think the concern becomes if you don't have the Rooney Rule, those coaches just don't get interviewed and don't get hired at all.
Right.
And maybe the system then shouldn't be, oh, let's make sure there are incentives for hiring minority coaches, and maybe let's punish or weed out the coaches who don't interview minority candidates organically and don't strive to create that environment without an outside incentive. Like if you
Hmm.
are a head coach and you have not hired more than one or two minority candidates in your 10 years in the league, maybe that says something about you and the league should take action against you for that reason, right? Um, but it's really thorny and complicated. So
Well, it's not like, league ownership and league executives are exactly the most diverse bunch themselves.
yeah, that's true too. That's true too. Um,
How do we do that? How do we get the Rooney Rule into the ownership perspective? When you
yeah,
sell
that
your
would be
organization, you have to offer it to one minority.
Yeah, it's like a percentage of the ownership stake has to be like a minority, like a
Right.
minority shareholder has to be a literal minority shareholder.
That's
Um,
insane.
yeah, I don't know. I think that that's a good point. Maybe you do it like the Packers, where it's quote unquote fan owned or whatever. But I, yeah, it's I think worthy of a full conversation. There was a lot of controversy around Brian Flores when he was coach of the Miami Dolphins, and they tried
Hmm.
to kind of get Tom Brady there and their choice of head coach, and that was its own complication. So I hope at some point, maybe we won't have time because the offseason is coming to a close, but we can have a broader conversation about the NFL's DEI initiatives, the Rooney Rule being a central part of it, and explore that because I think it's a conversation worth having, and taking a cursory look at all of the hires this offseason to head coaching positions. I don't know if any of those coaches were minority. Oh, Aaron Glenn, of course, Aaron Glenn. But anyway, let's briefly cover compensatory picks in the context of free agency as well. So there's no limit on the number of compensatory picks that can be given based on the Rooney Rule, but in free agency, there's a mechanism for awarding compensatory picks to teams. A maximum of 32 can be awarded, and there is a complex formula behind these. I won't get into too much detail, but when you see that a team is awarded a compensatory pick and you're asking yourself, why is that? The answer is, if it's not the Rooney Rule, because they lost players in free agency of a certain value and caliber and did not replace those players with comparable contracts. So, for example, the Philadelphia Eagles had the single most expensive free agent leave this offseason in Milton Williams, who went to the Patriots. The Patriots signed several high value free agents, including Stephon Diggs, who we mentioned in the previous podcast. So, because they're signing more players than they're giving up and signing those players to higher contracts than the players they're giving up, they likely won't receive compensatory selections. However, teams that lose those high value free agents and don't sign many free agents to replace them will likely receive compensatory picks. And those picks offset. So, a good example of this, I know the Lions, forgive me, but the Lions lost a cornerback who I believe made 18 million a year and signed a quarterback who made 16 million a year. So even though they lost an 18 million a year player, they signed a 16 million a year player at the same position, probably comparable level of play. And so they likely won't receive a compensatory pick, or at most might receive a late round compensatory pick because they lost a slightly higher value contract player. And so that's why when we were discussing trades with the draft picks last podcast, we mentioned compensatory selections. That's the context. Essentially, it's a sweetener for teams who lose players who are deemed to be high value players based on their contracts and performance in free agency. So maybe that gives an incentive to certain teams to let players walk, right, and get that compensatory selection back. And if it's a high round compensatory, they go as high as the third round. Maybe you can replace that player on a cheaper deal. But anything I'm missing on the compensatory selections, or any more detail you're looking for on the formula? Because I can sure try, but
No, it's an interesting idea. I wonder, you know, why not just let them leave if they want to leave? And that's it. Why must they be compensated for a player leaving? Is really the only thing I would have. I guess um the NBA, they have, the restricted free agency that first go round when they come off their rookie deals, and then afterwards they can literally just walk out the door for nothing. So
mhm.
this combats that, and I guess you know this probably helps with lower market teams, lesser market teams, if they have
Mm.
players leave, and it's like, sorry, I actually really don't want to go sign to the Cleveland Browns because of the Cleveland Browns, so the Cleveland Browns get a pick instead. So I guess that's fair.
Yeah, I wonder too if this is a vestige of the NFL didn't. Well, I guess they renovated free agency in the 1990s, but I think that there's probably just the owners are like, I don't like how it feels when a player that I wanted to re-sign leaves, and so I want a system that makes me feel better about it.
Hmm.
And yeah, for lower market teams too, I imagine it does provide that incentive, and what it might also do. It's interesting to think about. the Rooney Rule, I don't like the thought of, oh yeah, we're incentivizing or rewarding you for developing coaches. It's like a little bit of strange perspective, but I guess it's a way of acknowledging if you're a team that drafts very well and develops players to be very good players, it's sort of like a reward for having identified and developed high level talent to say, well, you now get additional chances because you did well in that particular aspect of the sport. But maybe that's another conversation to return to at some point as well, is why does this system exist? Who is it designed to benefit? Um, and maybe it just makes it easier for players to negotiate in collective bargaining for free agent rights because it's, hey, you're getting something back, so let us explore freedom more fully. I'm sure there's an interesting conversation to be had there, but mostly just wanted to give a general picture of what finances look like in the NFL, how positional value works. I know for fans of the NBA, I hadn't even thought of this, but it doesn't really matter what position you play. If you're the best, you get a max, and the max is a relatively set value. And in the NFL, position says a lot about contracts. And that was one of the conversations around Travis Hunter coming out in the draft, being both the wide receiver and corner. What franchise tag would you give to Travis Hunter if he's playing both positions, right? So
The
it's,
one that costs less money.
of course, right? Whatever benefits the team most every time. With that, any other things that you think we've missed or that are worth mentioning before we jump into some news? And
Um,
there's a lot to cover in news. So,
Last thing I would say is that we're, not experts necessarily at any of these things. We're reading resources and then presenting it.
yep.
Player side contracts, that's probably 50 pages long of things that I'll never understand. So do some research as well if you like really want to get into the nitty-gritty of it.
Yeah, this is definitely not meant to be comprehensive. This is just meant to make you feel relatively at ease when you get a tweet about a free agent signing and you can understand on some level what it might imply for a team. But yeah, you're absolutely right. This is surface. My understanding of it is very, very new and still very minimal, and that's from a dedicated football fan. So let's get into the news.
Let's
And
talk about it.
there's a lot of stuff that's going on in the league, both macro and micro. There's one story that's huge right now about the NFL Players Association, and we'll get into a little bit of that, but it's kind of a huge firestorm, and we simply don't have time to cover it without making it 80% of the news. So uh, we'll push that. I don't know how much of this have you seen, Damon, about what's going on with the NFLPA right now?
Not a lot. Not a lot.
Uh,
This is relatively recent, right?
yeah, it's
Yeah.
pretty recent. There's been multiple leaders in the NFLPA stepping down, and a lot of it stems from a report that came out where the NFL and the NFL Players Association were trying to keep under wraps the result of a collusion investigation regarding guaranteed contracts. Because unlike some other sports, you are not guaranteed to make every single dime on your contract. There are stipulations, there are injury guarantees, but you might not make all the money on your contract if you're not performing well, the team's interests change, etc. And when Deshaun Watson, quarterback for the Texans, was traded to the Browns and received a fully guaranteed contract, the league kind of quietly wanted other teams to not follow in the Browns' footsteps and not give fully guaranteed contracts. Hence, collusion, covering up the report, and all of the controversy that's come since. Just a huge conversation to have. So, why don't you tell me about the tweet that you saw this week that was interesting involving our president?
What you just told me does not sound ethical.
I
But
would say it
this
is probably unethical ball. Yeah.
this is also unethical. So, Adam Schefter, basically the Shams of the NFL, right?
Yeah.
President Donald Trump. I don't like saying that. That's what he tweeted. I'll just say Trump is threatening to hold up a new stadium deal for Washington's NFL team. Interestingly, he said Washington's NFL team instead of the Washington Commanders. If it does not restore its old name of the Redskins, that is considered obviously offensive to Native Americans, which is why they changed it in the first place.
Yeah. Yeah. Do you see this going anywhere?
Uh, I feel like no.
Yeah.
Why? I have a question. Why
Mhm.
does the president, why could he do stuff about Washington's football team?
So
I
I
know it's. I mean,
believe,
it's Washington. So, like, is that
right.
why?
Well, I think the stadium deal, a lot of stadiums, I don't know if this is true in the NBA, but, stadiums are financed through the cities that um, host them in many cases. They receive public funding. And so I
Hmm.
assume this means that either Trump can directly or indirectly influence the political situation in Washington, D.C. to prevent that funding from being dispersed, because it's not really like it's federal territory, right? So
Well,
I
that
think,
seems corrupt.
yeah, I actually would, as a political science major, I'm like, what jurisdiction does he actually have? But I have to walk away from that rabbit hole. But I would assume he would attack the funding from the city of DC, if
NBA
something were to come.
stadiums are usually they usually have like a sponsor. That's why they're named after a company or something.
See, they have that for the NFL too, but it's naming rights, not building rights. And I guess that's
Yeah, I don't
just
know if
like,
they're building rights. Who knows?
yeah, more money in the pocket. Maybe I'm not sure, but there are a lot of. I mean, Ford Field for the Lions is a great
Right.
example, and Heinz Field now Acrisure Stadium. So that can that can change hands in the blink of an eye, but
Yeah. I don't know about
that
that one.
one's tough. Levi's State. I mean, yeah, there's plenty of examples, right?
This is
Um,
terrible.
it's gross. It's gross and it's dumb and it's pointless. I think that I would want to root for a team that has the capacity to overcome its prior biases and change its perception of its own heritage for the sake of its fans and the world at large. And I wouldn't want to root for a team that kept begging to not have their name be their new name. So,
Yeah, I
um,
don't, I don't. I have a lot of issues with this. There's,
yeah,
there's, yeah, that's a whole thing. It's terrible. Hopefully they're still the Washington Commanders. That's what
uh,
I'll say.
if they battled to a draw and we got Washington football team back, I would be happy with that. I thought that
Yeah,
was
for
the
sure, for
best team
sure.
name, but it's funny too because on the Heed the Call podcast, they were playing this. I think some members of the Commanders might have visited like the Oval Office, and they were like, "Well, you are the ultimate commander," to Trump, I think, in that in that
Hmm.
meeting, and it's like, yeah, they're named after the commander in chief and the other commanders, so it's just like they're kind of named after you. Don't touch that part. It's yeah, which is the least important part of this conversation, but just a cherry on top of a Sunday of tomfoolery and moronic and bigoted behavior. So disappointing stuff. Let's jump ahead unless you have more thoughts you'd like to share on this topic.
I think I would just talk for too long.
Yeah, we could we'll add it to the list of topics to return to. I guess we're just going to do a second podcast that's this podcast but with more detail. Uh, let's get to the largest non QB contract in the history of the National Football League, going
Wowie.
to TJ Watt, the linebacker for the Pittsburgh Steelers, the edge rusher, receiving a 3-year, $123 million deal, 41 million average. This is a massive, massive deal for the Steelers. A leader of that team, heartbeat, core of their identity, game wrecker, and someone I just don't think you can really let slip away, especially if your goal is to continue winning.
Yeah, this is one of those like no-brainer kind of things where I don't really bat an eye. I'm like, oh, TJ Watt, yeah, that actually does make sense. It's not somebody that I think is getting overpaid. And despite all of Mike Tomlin's efforts, I don't think the Steelers will continue to be a winning team. But it's okay because it's like it's he's a lifer basically. He should be. So you just gotta reward your guy, and he's their guy.
Oh, 100%. I agree. I don't see the presence or absence of TJ Watt fundamentally altering Pittsburgh's Super Bowl odds, just because I don't believe those odds are terribly high personally. Aaron Rodgers said this week he thinks they're one of the 10 to 12 teams that can win the Super Bowl.
Sure, he does.
Maybe. But I will say without Watt, that very narrow sliver of light
Oh yeah, it's
would
gone.
close, right?
Yeah.
So this is a deal that absolutely must get done. Big deal for him. Congratulations to him. What a talented family of football players. Of course, brother of J.J. Watt, who should be Hall of Fame bound if he isn't there already.
Don't forget about Derek Watt.
Well, I mean, legendary fullback Derek Watt.
Fullback, yeah.
Yeah. Can't spell goat without Derek Watt.
Really picked a position that's going to pay off. So
yeah, he was like, I think my brothers will take care of me, so I'll go to the least thriving position in the National Football League.
Yeah,
it's tough. That's one of the interesting things about, I feel like in basketball you see positions evolve, but there's still the five same players on the court. Positions kind of rise and fall to a degree in the NFL over time in their prevalence, and I think that the fullback is a great example of that. But I would like us to move on so that we have time to get into our sensationalist, unethically over the top takes on team offseason. So I will briefly cover that the second round deal fiasco is over. We mentioned how not all contracts in the NFL are fully guaranteed. In fact, most are not. And in the second round of the draft, most of those contracts are not, or at least were not, guaranteed. But that has changed. The Texans.
It was never until this.
It was straight up never.
Yeah.
Okay, well then it was never true. It was fully never true until this year when the Texans signed the 34th overall pick, Jaden Higgins, to a guaranteed deal, forcing the Browns to sign the 33rd overall pick to a guaranteed deal. And then all of the agents and teams stood in a standoff for months as no other deals were signed in the second round until at last the 43rd pick, Alfred Collins of the 49ers, signed his deal. I believe at this point now, it's just a little over a week old news. And then all the other second round picks flooded in, such that now, on average, each second round pick is getting about 10% more of their contract guaranteed, which is non-trivial money, than they did the year prior. And I believe every second round pick, with maybe a couple exceptions, all the way down to the 40th pick, so the first 8 or 9 picks, are receiving fully guaranteed deals. The one exception being the now one unsigned player in the 2025 NFL draft, Quinshon Judkins, for the Browns, a running back who was arrested on domestic violence charges in Florida earlier this month. Unless you'd like to talk more about the second round picks, I think you should tell us who the second to last player to sign was. Our breaking news of episode 2.
Dun, 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 dun. I don't have that number in front of me. I think I remember it though. It was Bengals first round pick Shamar Stewart, I believe, signed 4 years, fully guaranteed, 18.7 million. That's the number off the dome, if I remember.
18.97. That was incredibly close. Well done.
Sorry, Shamar, I shorted you a little bit. That's my bad. Interesting, because we talked about him when we talked about T. Higgins last podcast and how they gave him a huge contract. Trey Hendrickson still in the ether somewhere. But congrats on getting selected in the NFL, and then months later the team said, fine. Fine, we do want you, I guess. Fine. I really hope I didn't have to pay you when I drafted you, but here we are. So I'm happy that he got that done the way he wanted to.
Yeah, I think that I'm going to side with the players 99.99% of the time, and this is very
unless they're Quinshon Judkins and have domestic.
That's a good
charges.
point. Yeah,
there's the time we're not.
I guess I'm trying to think of cases where I wouldn't side with the players, and the only thing I can think of would be like, if
crime.
You did something, crime is a good one there. I think that it's definitely something the Bengals needed to do. Trey Hendrickson still looming, but
will we see the third round pick signed next year? Ooh.
I mean, it's possible, right? I was reading articles talking about how this might cause even more guarantees next year, and then the subsequent sort of conversations that will be had around rookie contracts based on this dialogue. But I think it's a great step for the players to use that leverage to their advantage. And I'll give kudos to the Texans for signing a second rounder to a guaranteed deal and then starting this conversation and this cascade. And a rare example where player leverage turns into concrete results. And I think that's a really cool narrative. An example of players wanting to make more money and getting punished for it came down from the league today, with over 100 players set to be fined for involvement in the resale of the Super Bowl tickets that they purchase from the league. Those fines are a multiplier, I think 1.5 or 2 times the value, the face value of the tickets, and losing the right to purchase tickets from the league for the next few years. I guess it's kind of like an employee first come, first serve thing where they sell tickets to players, and then they were distributing those tickets to resale bundlers. And the league is not a fan. And any players who refuse the fine are at risk of suspension. So you brought this story to my attention. What do you think? Do you think the league should punish players for re-signing Super Bowl tickets or reselling Super Bowl tickets? Excuse me.
Originally, when I read the article that they were getting penalized for selling their Super Bowl tickets, I thought, oh, that's weird. Like, if they didn't have, like if players are playing in the game or they're supposed to go to the game and they get a certain amount of tickets for that, and then they don't have the people to go with them or people to go for them, or they have something, blah, blah, blah. I feel like they should be allowed to sell their tickets. When I read further into it and I realized it was to resellers and scalpers, I was like, oh, they deserve this actually.
Yeah. Here's
Never
that
mind.
0.01% we were talking about. Yeah.
I was like, yeah, I hate scalpers are like it's like scalpers and tow truck drivers are right there among the top
Oof.
5 worst group of people on Earth. And then like right above them is like racist or whatever. Um,
Yeah, that's the seventh circle of hell is reserved for people who increased the price of the Pistons Spurs game in Austin last year. That's
yeah, exactly.
yeah.
Right. So yeah, if that's like they're just doing it just to make a quick buck, then I think it's definitely worse. Especially because those seats are not cheap in the first place.
Yeah.
So selling them to again somebody who are they selling them to? I'm not sure. If they just give it to the group, and the group is like selling it to this dad who's worked the last 35 years to go to his first Super Bowl, saved up the money to do it, and he's paying a little extra, like that kind of sucks. So.
Yeah, that's a fair point. I think most players probably don't need that. I would hope don't need that extra chunk of change. And I know that they're going to be more severe to the players who actually kind of were working directly with the resellers. I would hope that maybe a lot of these players just didn't realize who they were selling it to potentially.
Mhm.
And that said, I think it's good they're cracking down on this. I think that anything that lowers the barrier for fans to experience the teams and sporting events they love live, I'm all for. As you said, there is a carve out, notably for the players who are playing in the Super Bowl. So even if you are hit with this fine and punishment, if you're playing in the Super Bowl that year, your ability to buy tickets for family and friends is still available to you, which I think is reasonable.
Do you
But
have to buy tickets or do you get them because you're in the Super Bowl?
my, I actually don't know. I would assume that because it's a league thing and not a team thing to have those tickets, that you would probably have to pay for them. I couldn't tell you with full confidence. If I pull open here, we cited our sources, so I can check the sources.
Yeah,
These
the
number of
second to
players.
last paragraph, I see this long-standing league policy, which is specifically incorporated to the CBA, prohibits league or club employees, including players, from selling NFL games acquired from their employer for more than
Uh
tickets face value. So does that mean they're just giving the tickets for free and then selling them? Because that makes it even worse.
well, it says or for an amount greater than the employee originally paid for the ticket. So
Mm.
I
Oh
wonder if
yeah.
my guess maybe would be each player maybe gets a set allotment. Like, oh,
Hmm.
you can have, two if you're in the game, and then maybe it's, that other players who aren't on those teams maybe have like the sort of employee privilege to buy tickets from the league if you're like, say, a New Orleans Saint, right? And you're not playing in the Super Bowl, but
Before they're
you're a
like
league
publicly
employee.
available for purchase.
Yeah, maybe something like that would make sense, but I couldn't
So
tell
they
you about
bought them and then resold it. Both of them are worse. Or both of them are worse. That doesn't make sense. Both of them are bad. Getting them for free and selling them is bad. buying them and then selling them at higher cost is also bad. Both are
Yeah,
bad.
it's just it's clearly not ideal behavior, and now the league is gonna put the clamps on it. It feels a little less hypocritical than the gambling situation, where they were suspending players left and right for being involved in gambling, and the announcement that they're suspended is sponsored by FanDuel, pretty much. Um, okay, we still got a few
Hilarious.
more. I mean, that's just kind of the reality, right? We got a few more things to hit. And then I want to have a brief conversation about the Dallas Cowboys cheerleaders as sort of a continuation of the conversation you were having with Dom on the episode of Two Man Game you just released. So briefly, Cardinals rookie defensive tackle Walter Nolan may miss the start of the season after injuring his calf. He is their first round rookie. Sort of a tough break for them. They don't have a clear timeline, but there's some worry that, yes, his injury will bleed into the season. And even if it doesn't, he'll lose a lot of valuable practice.
What
Justin
college do you go
Fields,
to?
what college are you asking? Is this a quiz? Like, are you
Hmm.
seeing if I know? Walter Nolan.
I know from college football, so that's
You know this with a bullet. Okay. Is
yeah.
this my brain is weirdly thinking like Louisville or something? Like I'm picturing a
Interesting.
Cardinal for some reason. I
Um,
guess because that's his professional logo. That's definitely. Oh, is it Ole Miss
it
or
is Ole
something like that?
Miss. It
Oh,
is Ole
okay.
Miss.
Cool,
Yeah.
cool, cool. Sorry, I don't know why I went Louisville. Ole Miss, nice. Um, have you played a lot with Ole Miss in college
I had
football? Or
a I
no?
had a road to glory running back career, a 4-year career on Ole Miss.
Oh, nice. Okay, so you stayed all four. Didn't
Did all
declare
four.
early.
I was not trying to. Actually, it was five. I was redshirted, so it's 5-year
Oh,
career.
use that COVID exemption to get that extra year. Um,
Develop my attributes a little more, you know.
yeah. It's interesting how for that game they likely had to include mechanics for players who were in college football for like 7 years because of COVID eligibility and all that stuff.
Hmm.
Um, yeah, that's the situation with Walter Nolan. Justin Fields, I believe, dislocated or in some other manner injured his toe, but is only day to day. He was carted off. A lot of concerns there, but he warmed up and then was just standing on the sideline just a couple days later. So looks like Justin Fields, the
I think it was the
22
day
man
after.
game.
Like he came to the field the next day. I watched him walk on the field, and I was like, "You got carted off yesterday? What, what's going
Yeah, and
on?"
they brought him back. Yeah, that was a pretty big deal there. There's one other injury. I neglected to put it in the roundup. Kind of a scary situation. The Dolphins had an offensive lineman, I believe, airlifted to the hospital today.
Oh,
Um, and he was in stable condition when they airlifted him. Yeah, Dolphins offensive lineman Bayron Matos. This was 2 days ago. And yes, is stable, but pretty terrifying anytime an injury requires that degree of intervention.
yeah,
Uh,
that's scary stuff.
yep, yep. In other defensive tackle news, speaking of Walter Nolan, defensive tackle, formerly of the Miami Dolphins, Christian Wilkins, was released after year one of his 4-year, $110 million contract with the Las Vegas Raiders. And he had his remaining guarantees, $35 million in remaining guarantees, voided by the team because he would not agree to another surgery on his foot. It was believed by the Raiders that he just would not be able to recover from this injury and return to play. He was not willing to get another surgery. And so they said, well, you didn't take sufficient steps to get back to the field, so we don't have to honor your guarantees. He has filed a suit with the NFLPA to try and get some of that money back. But a definitely kind of surprising release at this point in the calendar.
Yeah, um, that sucks. I don't
Yeah,
know what
I don't
else to
know.
say about
Yeah,
that. Like that's unfortunate.
yeah, it's we'll see if he lands somewhere. But with the condition of his foot, he'll definitely have to go through some physicals before they come to a consensus on that. Next up, second to last item here, safety Tyrann Mathieu, better known as the Honey Badger amongst casual fans. LSU legend, drafted by the Cardinals, has retired after, I believe, 12 seasons in the NFL. He won a ring with the Kansas City Chiefs and retires with the Saints. Do you have any input, insight? What is your impression of Honey Badger as a player? What do you think his legacy is going to be?
Yeah, I feel like people remember the name more than the player. I feel like that's kind of already the case.
Mm-hmm.
Um, it's interesting, if I was on the Saints, maybe I would retire too instead
Yep.
of playing on the on the Saints for another year.
Yeah.
Yeah.
They're
Especially when
not.
I mean, when you're an older player, it's like obviously your prospects for contention are not there.
Yep.
Kind of bounced around a little bit the latter half of his career, which is weird. I think, yeah, I think he as a player was fine, but I think the name thing like made him way bigger than maybe he should have been.
Yeah, I want to take a look at his stats because I think he, as a young player, was a pretty dominant.
When he was really young, he was really good. But kind of like I mentioned with Jalen Ramsey in our last podcast, like I feel like the name carried him for a while there.
Yeah, I think that's fair. He actually had pretty consistently high tackle numbers throughout his career. To his credit, that said, um, this is the profile of a player who's been a quality, solid contributor for much of the latter half of his career. But I think, yeah, some of the impression that he left early in his career, yeah, was the name, sort of his play style, and identity there. But yeah, I mean, he's definitely a player that I think for people who are watching around our era will remember and sort of retain knowledge of him, even if his play didn't necessarily always bear out to be like the most memorable play. He's one of those people that you always kind of hear about and
Hmm.
that would get hyped up as, oh, this, you got Tyrann Mathieu, this could change the direction of your defense. So um an interesting player to look back on the legacy of. And I think definitely his college legacy, I think, will
Hmm.
will potentially outshine his NFL legacy 20 years from now. But certainly a well-known name in the league.
Enjoy retirement at 33. I'll be jealous.
Yeah, savor that time. I think he wants to get into coaching, which would be pretty cool. And yeah, as we kind of mentioned last pod, once you're getting up to your early to mid 30s, unless you're an offensive lineman or a quarterback that's playing at a high level, that's when the career starts to fade there. So not a super surprising time to retire for him. Lastly, I want to ask you about the Dallas Cowboys cheerleaders. The
Hmm.
last 2 years, America's Sweethearts has been a documentary series
Okay,
about
I was like, did you just come up with that? Like you're just
has been
calling
a
it that?
no. The show
That's
is
the name
called
of it.
America's
Got it.
Sweethearts on
Yeah.
Netflix. It's all about the process of making the Cowboys cheerleading squad. It's a highly competitive process. My girlfriend watches the show. I've caught some of the show, and she clued me into the fact that the cheerleaders have gotten a pay raise, which begs the question, Damon,
Oh no.
in 2024,
No.
how many dollars per appearance do you think the a Dallas Cowboys cheerleader received
Per
per
game?
appearance? The listing says here appearance. I would assume that's game appearance because there's also an hourly wage listed. I don't know if that's for rehearsal, but
Hourly's crazy.
yeah.
Okay.
Well, that'll be a conversation as well. And I'll give you a hint. There was a lawsuit in 2018 when former cheerleader Erica Wilkins sued the Cowboys for receiving less than the annual pay for the team's mascot over the course of a year of performing, which you could maybe argue the mascot should make as much as the cheerleaders. That's its own conversation. I'll
Right.
tell you how much. I'll tell you how much she made in 2018 after you guess how much this
Yeah.
fifth year cheerleader, which pay varies by experience, made in 2024 per appearance. And I would assume this is per game appearance.
Yeah. Per appearance per game. How many games are in the season? 17.
17.
18 because bye weeks, but 17 actual games. Um, so let me do some quick math in my head. I'm gonna say 3,000 a game.
3,000 a game. Here's something crazy.
That's 51,000 for the year, which is like not nearly enough. It's lower, isn't it?
So I'm gonna explain why that number is sad because I think it's a fair number. I think it's a perfectly fair number for them to make. And I assume this might cover other events and stuff, other promo events. But
I guess low, by the way. I guess like way lower than I think they should make. I just want
You
that to be
were
out there.
I've got bad news.
Oh,
This fifth year
no.
veteran in 2024 apparently made $500 per appearance, and the hourly wage was $15 in that 2018 suit. Erica Wilkins reported receiving a flat rate of $200 per game with a $7 per hour wage and no overtime. So that's not enough. And as they cover in the series, most of the Dallas Cowboys cheerleaders have a second job to make pay. They do have some benefits, right? They have access to team physicians, which is good, and I guess nothing stops them from doing sponsored deals independently on things like social media. So that's good, I guess, but undeniably far too little money. The sad thing is the news I had, which I thought was good news, is they are receiving a 400% pay raise, which maths out to, I think, what, 2000 a game, which
Hmm.
is still lower than your low ball guess. So I figured it was worth mentioning in the context of, it's Damon is fully head and hands for those of you who are driving safely and not watching us talk about this. It's pretty brutal. It's a pretty brutal pay scale.
Yuck.
Yep. Big
Yeah,
ick.
that's crazy, especially because you like it's going back to comparing to the NBA. When I go to a football game, the amount of people that are in the audience because the stadium is so big comparatively to when I go to a basketball game, it's like I know that they are just raking in the money from obviously the fans that are there watching the game, ticket prices, concessions, etc. But of course, you have your network deals, television programming, advertisements, sponsorships, blah 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 blah. And I know it's a billion-dollar industry, um, and to pay your cheerleaders that little is crazy. So that sucks. I don't like that at all. Thank you for bringing that up. That's super sad.
It is. It is very sad. And without as clear of an analog, well, I'm sure there is a women's professional league out there. I don't think it has nearly as much traction, public awareness as the WNBA. Um, the cheerleaders are a very different relationship to NFL players than WNBA players have to NBA players. But I figured it was worth mentioning, sort of in conversation with what y'all had talked about, with how criminally underpaid WNBA players are relative to NBA players, especially as that league, the WNBA, is starting to take off.
I put it on the thumbnail because I learned about it after we had recorded that they only make 9% of the revenue, the players in the WNBA.
That is
The
that is
NBA is
brutal.
50%. So,
Yeah.
um, interesting.
A criminal. Yeah, it's criminal. And
This would be
you
a
know,
fun game to do sometime. Looking up all the people on the sidelines of a football game, like your water people and your camera people and your guy that has a bag of footballs and those people and figuring out how much each person makes. That'd be a a fun little trivia game right
I'm
there.
sure it wouldn't be fundamentally heartbreaking
It
from
would be
start to
very
finish.
sad.
Yeah. Um, yeah. Not optimistic about that, unfortunately.
My guess of $3,000, by the way, $3,000 a game for the 51 games. That's like when I started teaching in 2018, 51,000 was the minimum a teacher could make
Yeah.
in
Yeah.
Texas at least. It's less in other states, but in Texas. So
Yeah. And
that's
it's
not a high number.
it's not. I mean, like, again, most of them are working other jobs,
Yeah.
and I mean, it's another thing too, because what they really emphasize is how the Dallas, I mean, the training program to get in as a cheerleader is so exacting. It's not
Hmm.
like you're hiring random dancers; like, you are putting them through a grueling boot camp just
It's
for the
not the
chance to make the team.
grocery store bagger, it's a little more tedious, a little more rigorous than that.
Yeah, it provides a new context, and I think is very illuminating, uh, especially having seen the Dallas Cowboys cheerleaders in person last year. That was kind of part of that experience, was thinking about that in context. That's all I've got for news. I think that we should save our offseason takes into a big offseason sweeping look next week, and maybe we bake in some predictions. I think we should keep people coming back wanting more. You're armed, you're educated, a lot of big stories this week. And then next week, it's going to be all about ball, and not just normal ball, but ethical ball as well. So,
Ethical ball, unlike the many things we just talked about.
yeah, the examples of unethical ball that are prevalent throughout the National Football League,
You said
and it's
500 a game, right? 500 a game.
$500.
That's
$500.
so 17 games, assuming you work every game. That's $8,500.
Yep, that would be correct. Yep.
Okay.
I would assume like
That's not close to.
let's be generous. Let's be generous and say there's 10 events that also get them that appearance fee that aren't that,
Mhm.
like Fan Fest or stuff
Sure,
like
sure,
that.
sure.
Great. Now it's 13K. And then I don't know, I guess every rehearsal you're making your tight 15
You're
an
making
hour.
hourly wage, yeah.
Unbelievable numbers. And
Sorry, I keep bringing it up. I just can't get my head around it.
it's unbelievable. And that was a fifth year veteran's pay. So if you're a first year
It's even
cheerleader,
less, yeah.
right? Yeah. So 400% sounds like a massive number in the context of how much they were making initially.
Right.
It's not. It's
And
not.
I do also want to point out, probably one of the reasons the show was made is I feel like the Dallas Cowboy cheerleader specifically has been like a glorified position
Yeah.
as like a cheerleader or any, kind of profession like that. So to learn about that amount of pay is pretty ridiculous.
It makes you scared about what the other team's cheerleaders are receiving.
Right.
They also never explicitly declared how much more. Like the Cowboys don't disseminate the salary. This is a
Hmm.
former cheerleader leaking this number, and then the
Hmm.
Cowboys being like, "Yeah, we're paying them more this year," and that was like a big narrative. The cheerleaders kind of petitioning for that on the show this season. So I've been told. So, um, it I think is really important as a sports consumer to be aware of the inequities rampant in that world and to give a voice to them. So I'm glad we were able to discuss this, and I hope we see continued reform and additional pressure as the years go on.
Maybe they should wear "Pay Us What You Owe Us" shirts.
That that would be fascinating. I'm trying to think like what I feel like, unlike WNBA stars, unfortunately, the Dallas Cowboys cheerleaders probably don't have the profile to protect them from retribution for that, um, especially because it's such a coveted role. But the
Hmm.
comments from like Charlotte Jones, I believe, made these comments, who is one of the sort of executives in the Cowboys organization related to Jerry Jones, the owner slash head football guy. And she was
Slash
like, well,
demon.
slash demon. The it's a good way to put it. Said, oh well, they're here for more than just like a job, right? Maybe they are, but that doesn't give you the excuse that you can then compensate them less for doing the work that they're
Yeah, it's
doing.
it's not like I'm here for my job, so please pay me my 100% salary. I'm only here for 50% of the job and 50% to grow my brand. Okay, that means we'll only pay you for 50% then, and then the
Yeah,
growing your brand will just you can figure that part out.
compensate, maybe. Yeah, this, it's something that as teachers, right? I guess now technically as a former teacher in transition, um, and you being a teacher, there is definitely, I think, some of that conversation in our industry as well. Is, oh well, you're doing a very difficult task, but you derive meaning from it, so that means you're getting a different form of value than just money,
Mm,
and so we can stiff you on the money to a degree. And I think in like passion driven work, when in reality that doesn't reflect the fact that the needs of an individual don't change, right? Loving what you do doesn't lower the rent, it doesn't make groceries less expensive, right? You don't go to the cash register and sign your like scan your "I'm happy to be working where I work" card and then get your 40% off. So the material considerations are the same, and I hope eventually the league reflects the material conditions of the people who work for it, whether they're players or not.
that was a great way to put it.
Oh, thank you. Glad I
Always
glad I
waxing
could.
poetic, this guy.
Hey, that English degree has to go somewhere. I'm just glad I could ethical ball out on the Ethical Ball Podcast
Oh,
Network.
there you go.
There we go. Got to plug it. Got to plug it. I was listening back to episode 1, and the number of filler words I used made me deeply ashamed, and the number of times I plugged made me very proud. So
Okay.
I'm going to keep that up.
As I'm going through
Every
the the shorts process, I had to cut out a lot of ums for me, you, and Dom. We all do it
Yeah.
throughout. So
As a former speech and debate instructor, I, when I got hired for that job, was on the phone with the founder of the company, who is a small company. It's not like it was
the founder,
Jeff Bezos, right?
Kier
Uh,
himself. That's crazy.
it was Rose Debate, and his last name was Rose. So there you go. And
Checks out.
part of the conversation was, hey, did you know you have a filler word? Do you know what your filler word is? And then he told me how many times he had counted me saying the word over the course of 1 minute. And I think it was somewhere between 8 and 12. And so I am wired to not be a filler words person. And my vow to the listener is that my filler word usage will be judicious and only for the sake of enhancing the product henceforth.
Mm, there you go. I'm gonna make a short of just you and filler words now.
That would it just that vow and then every in the first two episodes I think would be peak content. I would watch in shame. Like it's all there. Anyway, let's
We got him.
let's give our listeners a sign off here. If you have not if you've not subscribe. If you've not listened to episode 1 and you're itching for more opinion on football before we get into that big time next week, go back to episode 1. And of course, check out Two Man Game with Damon and Dom for conversations that are similarly focused, not just on the love of the game, but the love of the people involved in the game and the ethics behind the game. So is it time for me to make my field goal kick? Damon.
Yeah. I wanted to say this earlier, but I forgot. When you came earlier, you complimented Two Man Game in our last episode. I think it would be, I'm not obviously going to do this, but it would be funnier if I did that instead. Like I came into to the show and I was like, I
Complimented,
really
yeah.
liked your last episode. It's like
Yeah.
I was in.
Hey, that's a great. Yeah. I was listening to Two Man Game, honestly, like 2 or 3 times this week because I just enjoyed it so much. Okay, Damon, that's
Stupid.
cool. Yeah. When you said your week was podcasts and TTRPG, you just meant listening to your own podcast
Yeah.
and TTRPG. That
Yeah,
was, yeah.
I'm just in the lab. I mean, I was, pumping out those. What did I do earlier? The Travis Hunter one. That's what came out earlier.
Oh, nice, nice.
I made like I realized now I made like 12 shorts from our first episode, which is way too many. So so
Yeah, I think we'll probably have a few from this one.
yeah.
Not as much incendiary football opinions. Um, here, Joe Burrow is cringe sometimes. Clip that.
There
Uh,
you go.
all right, I've got my football. My background's off. I'm home from Ford Field. Posts are up.
I gotta, yeah.
The microphone's in my way, interfering. There's a light breeze in here. It's gonna be tough. All right, here we go.
Microphone's offsides.
Microphone is offsides. Encroachment, 5 yards.
Neutral zone infraction.
We're gonna have to do a whole episode on what are the penalties. Please no.
Why are there 3 different names for essentially the same thing?
That I would like to know the answer to. And every other penalty, we encourage the listener to watch the games themselves and figure it out. All right, the kick is about to go up.
I didn't see it at all.
Hang on. We're taking a second. We're taking a second attempt. The offsides.
Timeout.
So
We iced the kicker, so
we iced the kicker. Taking a second kick that didn't even get off the ground, and
he just hit the lineman right in the back of the head.
I beat the lineman, and so Damon, would you say that kick was good or
no good?